I have shivers. That was so freaking awesome. Wow.
I didn't know you were a rocker. Are you a rocker?
I like rock music eventually, from time to time.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. Welcome to Books and Bangers. I'm Chris Cernell, a.k.a. Oh Hush, 2 times Grammy-losing songwriter, music producer, and Accidental Book Club founder. Every month, we pick a book and I write an original song inspired by it. Part book club, part music project, part Goodreads soundtrack. And tonight, we're wrapping up our 2-month power and poetry theme with The Poet Empress. Either that copy or, if you want that one instead, I think this is an autograph copy. Is that your autograph?
That is my autograph.
All right. And thanks for signing it legibly because other people just like make a line. Anyway, this one is dark, sharp, brutal, beautiful, and absolutely not here to let anyone off the hook. The Poet Empress is a stunning debut about poetry, power, empire, survival, forbidden literacy, love as a weapon, and the story's history chooses to remember. And even though this one might look Romantasy adjacent based on the cover, it is not Romantasy. It has longing, intimacy, obsession, tenderness, and some deeply unwell romantic energy. But every time you think the book might soften, it just kind of twists the knife instead. This is a debut novel, but this thing does not read like a debut, which makes sense because it was not exactly her first swing. The author spent years writing before The Poet Empress, and you can feel it on the page. The control, the darkness, the restraint, and the deeply rude ability to make you care about people you should absolutely not care about. So anyway, please welcome the brilliant, poem-wielding, heart-stabbing author of The Poet Empress, Shen Tao. Hi, Shen.
Hi, Chris. It's an honor to be here, and that song was like the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. So thank you so much for making that.
Wow. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
So normally we start by asking everyone here to rate the book out loud so that the author can be publicly shamed. But tonight we're not going to do that because you seem super nice and this book already hurt us enough. So instead, I'll start with my questions. We'll open it up to a Q&A at the end. And if you've got questions as we go, drop them in the chat. I'll pull a few along the way. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's do it. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning. When did you first get into writing? When did it shift from like, I like writing to wait, I might actually be able to kind of do this for real?
Yeah. When I learned the concept of what discipline is, probably, I think a lot of times as a kid, I would fancy being a writer and think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to one day be a writer? But it took some time to learn, probably when I was a teenager, that writing is hard work. It's something that isn't just you want to write and then it gets done. You have to actually consistently put in effort, like day after day, to achieve it. And I've seen that advice, online. I've heard it from other writers, and I really began to internalize it. Probably at the end of high school, when I finished my first book, I would get my parents to drive me to the library every single day over the summer, and just stay there until from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and just be at the keyboard. And I think that was the summer where I really transitioned from wanting to be a writer to actually becoming one fully. Well, in my mind, it took a lot longer than that to actually publish a book. But yeah, I think there's always, I'm still learning that. I'm still learning how to not start a million things and never finish any of them. So yeah, I think that was about when.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you brought up there was a famous quote that I love is, if you want to be the noun, you've got to do the verb. So if you want to be the noun writer, you've got to actually write. If you want to be a songwriter, you've got to be the verb. You got to write songs. 8 hours a day, that's a pretty serious, that's a lot of time. But that's how you get great, right?
Yeah, I think in my mind, if I wanted to treat it like a job. And I saw that people who are doing their job, like, engineering as an example, because it came up beforehand, they would be at the office for 8 hours a day. And so I saw that, and I wanted to bring that kind of discipline into writing. And I really believe that writing is a skill that can be learned. And, I didn't want to give up if I wasn't good enough yet, because much like any other profession, like you go to school to be a doctor, nobody expects you to just be performing surgeries, day one. So you put in the work and then you learn how to do it. And then eventually you get to do it.
That's actually one of the good things about maybe being an author and a songwriter is it's so hard and so competitive, and most people just don't or can't put in the time or the work, right? I mean, it could be discipline, or it might just be like, I got to pay the bills or something like that too. But I mean, it's sort of one of the ways to, like, if you have to really want it to actually to make it as a writer. I've read that the Poet Empress was your 9th manuscript. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
So tell me about a little bit about the first 8, and tell me about that journey to, I mean, like, some people would quit, right? A lot of people might be like, okay, book 1, book 2, 3, 5, 7 didn't hit, and you just kind of kept going.
Yeah, I think I was very dogged in pursuing my dream of writing, and I knew that it was something eventually I want to do. And I think I just clung into that belief that we talked about, that if I just kept doing it, getting better at it, eventually I would get published, because in my mind, there was no option for failure. I was just going to keep trying until I retired, basically, so I just kept going and going. And I think something that really motivated me is that one of the writers I really looked up to, Brandon Sanderson, small-time author, you may not have heard of him. No. But he talks pretty openly about how it took him writing 13 books to get published. And in my mind, I thought, if somebody as amazing and great as Brandon Sanderson didn't give up and kept writing and writing, that was very encouraging to me. So just looking at examples of people who have come before me and have done it, I think is really inspiring.
Did you feel like any of those first 8 were like, this one could, I'm sure, maybe, I mean, at least for me, every song I've written, it's like, oh, this might be the one. I would stop writing it if it wasn't good enough. So, like, it's sort of delusional optimism that I always had. I don't know if you've had that too, but did you think any of those first 8 were it, or were going to be it?
It's funny you bring that up, because I think one part of it is this discipline and the other part is delusion. I think you have to really be a little delusional to make it as a creative person. And I'm telling you, Chris, I relate to that feeling completely, because every single book of those 8, I thought, this is it. This is going to be catapult me to, mega writerhood. And this is going to be the one. And then you finish writing it and you feel a little bit like, you look back on it and you say, oh, and it's something that I can really only identify with hindsight as I learn and grow more as an author. Like, sometimes, what I wrote at the end of high school, I thought that was the bomb. That was amazing. And, of course, when I look back on that now and read it, I was like, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if this is safe for public eyeball consumption. So I think with hindsight, I can identify the things that I needed to improve. And I'm sure even with the Poet Empress, 5-10 years from now, I'll look back and think, okay, I could have done this and this and this better. So there's always a process, and we're always improving. But at the moment, we're always super delusional about everything.
When you started working on, or when you were working on the Poet Empress, did it feel any different than any of the previous 8? Was your delusion higher, or your optimism higher with it, or was it just another one and you were just like, yeah, this is it, and it's the same as the last few? Or yeah,
that's a great question, because something did change with the Poet Empress, and I talk about it a little bit in the acknowledgement section. I think I start off by saying, what changed with the Poet Empress is that I brought other people onto the journey with me. Up until the Poet Empress, I was writing alone. I was improving alone, which is good, but you make smaller steps. I would say. And with my 9th book, I started bringing it to critique workshops and finding critique partners and asking people, hey, what do you think about this? And some of those, critique partners I now call friends, friends for life. It really changed my life, because they looked at it and they said, Shen, you should really submit this. I think this is really good. So I think that is one of those moments where it crosses from individual delusion to, once you start getting feedback, and once and they pointed out plenty of things to improve too, alongside all the good. I think that was what really changed, is not going at this alone.
I have a bunch of indie authors, maybe even here tonight and in my community. What does that look like? Is it just finding some friends, or is it a local thing? Is it online? What did that look like for you in terms of finding sort of that critique group?
Yeah, that's a great question. I went to a few writing workshops, and I realized there is a little bit of a, privilege associated with going to workshops, that not everybody has that is able to take time off work. But fortunately, I was in a position where I had that privilege and I was able to attend. And I went to a few like week-long or, writing workshops where you would stay with a bunch of other writers and you would exchange work, and there would be critique groups and also, workshopping and studying the craft as well. And that was where I met a lot of my writing friends that I have.
Still friends today, right?
Still friends today, yeah.
Love it. Okay, so let's talk about the Poet Empress specifically. What was the first spark of the idea? Was it Way? Was it the palace? Was it the heart spirit poem, poetry as magic? Where did it start for you?
Yeah, actually, so all the factors you named, I think, came pretty early into a very serendipitous confluence, I would say. Not every book happens where there's a combination of so many things that went right in terms of the formulation of the idea. Like oftentimes you would come up with a magic system, but you don't have a setting to put it in. You have a character, but you don't have, a story for them. And I think with the Poet Empress, a lot of those factors came very early on, which I think also contributed to making it my first successful book. What actually probably came first was Wei, the main character. I think I started writing in her voice. I talk about having written the first few chapters in almost a fevered burst. And I just found her voice very, very quickly. And it's a voice that is so different from all the books that had come before. I very strongly felt for her character. And immediately she was, stuck in a famine. She had a problem. She, and this is how she was going to solve it. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to follow her journey. And everything else came very, very quickly after.
How quickly did the Cruel Prince come in?
Ooh, so the Cruel Prince came in pretty quickly. He was always going to be in the draft. I don't know if he was going to be the focus of the story in the beginning, but he was present during the first few chapters. I mean, you've read the first few chapters, so how the third prince comes in and offhand says the first prince and second prince and actually heir is very cruel right now. Right. And actually, he was the first prince at first. That's a lot of the word first. In previous drafts, he was the first prince. Yeah. So he was always there. I didn't know how much the story was going to be about him until I started doing the outline. So that came pretty early on at the outline stage, I would say.
Did you know from the beginning that this was going to be like such a dark book, or did it kind of reveal itself as dark as it went, or how early did it get dark?
It got dark. It did not start off dark, even though, there's a very melancholy tone to it. But again, I think it was during the outline phase. And that's still fairly early on for people, who are curious about the process or my particular process. I do the outline first. So in this case, I wrote the first few chapters and then I did the outline. And I did a first draft that I threw away completely. And then I did a second draft, which is much closer to the final product that you see on the shelves today. And so the outline was kind of the second phase. So still like super early on, I would say, but not as early as the first, finding the voice and finding the character of Wei. So at the outline phase, I knew how the story was going to end. I knew the big twists at the end. I knew what the subject matter was. And I think at the time I was still, apprehensive because I hadn't written such a dark story before. But as I was writing the outline, it was just where the story wanted to go. And given the setup, kind of a world where women aren't allowed to read, where underage girls are sent to, the palace to serve as concubines, given that kind of setup and the famine going on and just this tragic, brutal environment, there wasn't anywhere else the story was going to go, I think. And so it was a leap that I had to take.
When did the title, The Poet Empress, come in? Was that early, or is that something sort of after you finish the book, you can kind of slap the title on? For me, like as a songwriter, the title is like almost, the concept is maybe the most important, but the title is the next most important thing. And I don't even want to start a song unless I've got a title. I don't know what that's like for you and where this one landed.
This one actually came after the fact. So I had originally titled it Literomancers of the Azalea House, which is kind of a mouthful now that you think about it. And I think there's some merits to it. I think I was going to do something really cool where you think the Little of the Azalea House was about the princes, but then by the end, you realize that they're actually about the women who are learning to write. And I was going to mic drop the title in there at the end there. And I had all sorts of cool things going on. You're laughing because you probably relate to that as a songwriter. But ultimately, I think there was just too many. With the POET Empress, a title like that, you can kind of immediately see the title and you can know the main facts about the book. But Little was going to be a new concept, and there was all sorts of things that led to the change after the fact.
I mean, the POET Empress is an amazing title. Like I think about titles all the time. It's an amazing title, and the Little of the Azalea House. It's a little bit of a mouthful. It's a little harder to spell. It's like POET Empress, easy to spell, easy to Google, like all those things that I always think about when I'm writing a song title. In hindsight, the POET Empress is the perfect title. But you talked about Literamancy. So I love the Literamancy magic system. Why and where did poetry as a magic system come from?
Yeah, I've always loved poetry. I've always loved reading poetry growing up, and actually, poetry is a very strong part of Chinese culture, I would say. Like, even before I learned to read, I learned to memorize poems and classical poetry and perform them in front of extended family. And it's something that I didn't really appreciate as a child. I would just memorize the words, but not really understand the meaning. But a lot of these poems, once I come back to as an adult, I get very emotional because now I can understand the subtle layers and nuances behind the poems. And I think one layer of it is the emotions that the poem conjures. Another layer of it is just kind of looking back and seeing how far I've grown as a person, that now I'm able to understand and feel and connect with the poets. Whereas as a kid, I was just memorizing the words. So I think that was always a subtle, as a writer, I think, and I'm sure you relate as a creative person, every single thing that we experience throughout our lives ultimately comes back into our art in some form or another. And, when I was a kid, there was no way, these poems would ever be useful in my later life, or so I thought, right? But I was writing, I think a lot of that started coming back, and especially given the setting that the POET Empress is set in, I think I wanted to pay homage a little bit.
Was poetry as a weapon? Was that? I don't know that I've ever seen that before. Was that just? Is there? How did you kind of come up with? Okay, I'm going to make this. We're going to write poems, and that's what's going to cast these spells to hurt or kill or whatever it might be. Something
I find really fascinating and cool about poetry and all storytelling, art in general, is its ability to quickly convey complex emotions that, we have a very finite vocabulary for emotions. We can say we're sad or angry or, a list of finite words. But when you expand that into an art medium, you can convey these very complex, very subtle bits of emotion that are just, nostalgic, mixed with fear, mixed with, all sorts of complex emotions. And I find that poetry is able to do that so succinctly and so elegantly, and not just emotion, right? There's also truth behind it. And I thought there must be some kind of power behind that. It seems like almost magic in a way. You can transmit emotions directly into the mind of someone else. That's kind of sorcery to me, at least.
I love that. Songs are basically poems in a lot of ways, especially with the rhyme scheme. Absolutely. A lot of people would just say Taylor Swift is writing poems and then putting them to music, right? Mm-hmm. But I 100% agree. Just the power of, turns of phrase and rhyme schemes and the way words sounds word sound is so important too. A lot of times, even when we're writing, and probably even with you might want to say something, but it's it doesn't read quite well. I needed to roll off the tongue better or something like that. But I love that. There is a lot of poetry or power in poetry. One of the things I loved is the dueling couplets, sort of the game that Taryn and Marl play, where they have poetry. It's not a battle. It's more of a just you start it and I'll finish it. And it reminded me of songwriting collaboration. How did you come up with that?
Oh, yeah. So there is a concept in Chinese poetry. Again, I just wanted to caveat that the POET Empress isn't set in China or anything. It's very much an epic fantasy that's inspired by a historical setting. But I did take inspiration. And in Chinese poetry, there's this concept called duilian, which is essentially translates to opposing couplets or opposing rhymes. where and you know, poets used to do that, where they would come up with the first line of a poet and then of a poem, and then the next poet would come up with a rhyming line to it, and then you see so many instances of that in the past, and so that's always been a very interesting concept that I think was just again one of those things that I knew about, never thought it would come back into my art, but as I was getting there, I was like, oh, you know, when you're building out a magic system, you think about like, how do people use it? How do people use it for entertainment, for art? How do they practice using it? And that was one of the things that came in. So
I love that you learn things as you go, and you sort of store them, and they're sitting there for 10 years or 20, however, and then when you need it, it's able to pop out. That's sort of we homeschool our kids, and one of the things we was talking about is memorization and learning things, because you want to be able to pull those out when you need them. You can't just Google or use AI or whatever. By the way, Vicky had to go. She said the dueling couplets reminded her a little bit of rap battles, like where two rappers are like start a line and like it's,
totally.
Yes. Or even like an improv, like you said, you sort of throw each other lines back and forth and do that. I love that. That's great. What's your favorite poem?
My favorite poem? It is one by E.E. Cummings, I would say. I think it's called Spring is a Perhaps Hand. It's so weird and interesting, and it uses language in such an interesting way. So that's always been a long time favorite. I really like his poetry. Something that I liked really recently is called The Orange by Wendy Cope. And if you haven't read it yet, I highly suggest you just Google it. It's 4 lines, and it's just, again, we're talking about how efficiently poetry transmits emotions. Yeah. That was one of the poems where I just almost teared up reading it, because it would just express so much in so few lines and such simple words, you know. So yeah, 2 recent favorites, or one not so recent and the other recent.
The Orange by, who was it by?
Wendy Cope.
Wendy Coke. Somebody can Google that and throw it in the chat right now, and we can see what it is, and we'll all start crying as we as we read it.
Yeah, it's just 4 lines. Yeah,
I love it. So once poetry is magic, banning women from reading and writing is not just denying them an education; it's denying them power. Can you talk about that connection and how you used it in the book?
Yeah, historically, literacy was forbidden to women in a lot of places, and I think that led to a lot of power structures that we see today, and a lot of it is something that is very it's not a very subtle metaphor, I would say. I think if you're denying people literacy, you're denying people power, even in a non-magical world where today's society where literacy isn't magic per se, but it is magic, because we talk about the ability to convey truth and emotion, and who gets to write truth, and who gets to write emotion, and who gets to tell the stories, right? I think that was a big part of the Poet Empress as well. It's whose stories get to be heard. And, when I was writing the Poet Empress, I made a deliberate choice not to include any poems by women in the text. So there is actually no poetry by any woman in the book. And that was a deliberate reflection of the society they live in. It was, the irony is that her story is the one that's being told. Like, actually, we're reading it, but, in her world, her story isn't told. She's just in the shadows. And if we were living in the world of the Azalea House and we look back in history, they would see Theron, they would see Maro, they wouldn't even know Wei existed at all, probably. So I think that there was some layers of irony that I want to include, and I was very much thinking about the whole Empress was such an interesting story to write, because it was a story about stories and a story about writing. And I found that a lot of my journey paralleled Wei's journey, as a writer. As she was writing the story and discovering the story, I was discovering it too. And a lot of the choices, I had to be very conscious about what choices I was making as I was writing the Poet Empress, because of the nature of the magic system and the nature of its contents.
I love what you were saying there. This ties into one of my pet topics, which is that history is never neutral, right? The winners write history, and historically that has usually meant the powerful people, and very often men, and they decide what gets remembered, what gets erased. And there's a line that I highlighted in the book. It says, the names of women may not be in the bylines of the history, but we still have the power to change things from the shadows. And then Wei wonders if women were always there in history, and she says, we were kind of between the lines, but not visible. So can you talk about that idea a little bit more of women shaping history, even when they're not in the official record of history?
Yeah, I think it's something based on our modern sensibilities, you can kind of look back and reflect, and of all, and this is agnostic across cultures, right? I'm kind of using Chinese history as a reference because that's the history I grew up learning and knowing, and you kind of realize, even as a kid, you kind of realize at a certain point that why is everybody in it written down in history a man? Why, what are the women doing during all these times? It seems impossible that they're not influencing anything in the course of the world. Of course, later on, as I mature, you kind of realize that, like you're saying, Chris, history isn't neutral. It's written by somebody and it's recorded by somebody. And so what are people choosing to include and what are people choosing to omit? And that's all a choice, I think.
Exactly. And I mean, I even think about, just all of history, like women obviously were present and we're doing all sorts of things, and yet we don't see it. But I love sort of ways, positive, maybe delusional optimism a little bit of, listen, we're here influencing all the things. We may not get the credit, but we have a lot more control than history says and shows that we do. I love that idea because I constantly think about that every time. Even when I'm reading history, it's like, what's not being said here? What did the losers, what if the losers won, the people that didn't win the war or whatever, what if they wrote the history? What would it look like? I love that. One thing that hit me early in the book is that the palace pushes the concubines into competing with each other for survival status, the emperor's or Terran's attention. It feels like the system keeps women fighting against each other instead of realizing how much power they actually might have if they work together. Was that a dynamic that you were consciously building?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that not only applies to women, but the men as well in the palace. And I was very cognizant of that. I would say that, and this is maybe like some of my thoughts and my views shaping the book, but I really feel like patriarchy doesn't really just benefit the men. I think it actually hurts everybody. And you see that a little bit in the POET EMPRESS, where there's competition being forced at all levels, from the top to the bottom. And you could argue that some of the happiest people are the people of the village who are suffering from the famine, even though they're suffering so much. And how can this be? How can a system that ostensibly rewards the people at the top be so punishing to them? And that was an idea that I was very fascinated by and I wanted to explore.
I love that. I've never thought about the idea that the patriarchy harms men just as much. Can you say a little more about that? I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to opine too much, outside of the scope of my book, because I feel like I've presented the text. This is what I have to say.
Sure.
And I'm not like a philosopher or anything.
Sure.
I think I just feel like there's a lot of less than ideal viewpoints being imposed on the princes and expectations, and a lot to do with masculinity and what the idea is of what it's like to be a man. Like, you have to lead the country, you have to be warlike, you have to assert dominance. And I think there's a lot of things that aren't said out loud but are enforced through expectations, to these boys. And I think the book very overtly says what the expectations are for the women, and women should be this and this and this. But the counterpart to saying what women should be is that you're also saying what men should be, right? And I think both of these impositions hurt people, because we're not always going to be like that, and maybe we don't always want to be like that.
And Morrow, who's, I think he's still a kid at the time, relatively young, he's out building and doing it, using his power, and then he's almost dying. But, sort of like you said, the patriarchy is on his shoulders. Like, I've got to keep pushing. I've got to be strong and all that. And he almost gives up his life doing that. Certainly that's a good example of what you're talking about. I
think so too. Yeah. I think that was one of the things.
And another thing I thought that was cool is, like you said, some of the happiest people in the book are probably the villagers. Like, the old story goes, like, there's some guy fishing in Mexico or something, and a corporate guy comes down for a vacation, and he's like fishing with him, and he's like, oh, you should buy 17 boats and I'll invest in you and all that, and you can scale this up and have a big fishing operation and you'll make millions of dollars, and then in 20 years you can retire and then come to Mexico and fish. Oh, that's what you're doing, right? It's like people, it's sometimes the simplest life is the happiest life. And yeah, that's kind of a good point.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story.
And on the idea of women, like, I've heard this version from women in my real life too, where in certain spaces there's only room for women to win. So the competition gets aimed at each other instead of at the system, creating scarcity. Again, is that something you were kind of trying to get across to the reader in the book?
I think with any, I'm always careful about like saying, what do I want to get across to the reader?
Right. It's
no, that's okay. These are really great questions, and I'm really enjoying talking about it. I just wanted to say that sometimes when I'm writing, I don't overtly think about the themes. I do think about the themes. I think about the themes a lot. But sometimes there are emergent themes or things that come up after the fact, and you look back and you realize, oh, this is what I was talking about all along. And part of that discovery is like super cool. So I just wanted, this is a bit of a tangent, to be honest. I just wanted to say that it wasn't like I set out to write a book about the oppression of women. It was more so I set up the book that way. I set up Wei as a character, and I was following her journey as a story, and what does she experience, and what is she trying to tell us, and what is she trying to say, and following that lead, I think, was a major part of the discovery process for me.
I love that. You don't necessarily have it outlined in your head on the specifics of that. It just sort of reveals itself as you're writing. And then my interpretation of the book might be completely different from everybody else's, and I might see it as, like, yeah, well, it's showing that the men are the victims, and maybe it's the women. Yeah. That's what makes art beautiful, right?
But yeah, exactly. And you hit on a good point, Chris, in that I think a lot of systems of oppression oppress by seeding competition between the people who are being oppressed. And in this particular case, it's the concubines. They don't necessarily realize they're being oppressed because they're all competing for that one spot. And you see that pattern a lot. So yeah, I think you totally hit on a good point there.
Okay, great. One thing I loved about the book is how slippery everyone is. There's alliances, there's betrayals, hidden motives, double crosses, moments where I generally had no idea who was playing who. How do you approach writing that court intrigue without sort of losing the thread?
Ooh, this is a great question, because I don't know if it's a developed system that I have yet. I'm trying to approach my next books like this, where, in the past I've like tried to plot everything out, tried to plot beat by beat. For the Poet Empress, I very much created characters and I followed them based on their motivations. Like I talked about following Wei already, starting with a strong idea who she is, what her goals are, and just never straying from that. Or if I am straying from that, it's her decision. Why is she doing that? And to some extent, I did that with all the characters. I knew who the characters were. I knew what initially motivated them. And it kind of just, because we talk a lot about bringing like other, cross-disciplinary arts into our creativity. I tried to do a bit of like method writing in a way where I inhabit the world of the heads of the characters, and I tried to think through decisions like, what do I know? What would I do given what I know? And I think a lot of those steps, and just making sure. So my role as a writer is to place their initial conflicts and goals at odds with each other, and that's where the juiciness of a story comes from. And that's all I have to do. After I've done that, I kind of set them loose, and then they're acting as themselves in a way.
Method writing this kind of book has got to be kind of a dark place to be.
Yeah.
I laugh, but I'm like laughing like slightly horrified. But yeah, I'm sure that's probably a little bit dark. Let's talk about the fact that this book is not romantasy. It looks a little bit romantasy adjacent. It was shelved with romantasy books. It's got a cover that could maybe be romantasy-ish. The sprayed edges, love as a weapon, a lot of that. But it's very much not a romance. Was there ever a point where you thought this story might be a romantasy, like maybe in the early stages, or did you always know it was kind of going somewhere darker?
Yeah, so I talked about having a complete outline. So I think before I had the outline, it was the Wild West. Like, she could have had a romantasy with like the Third Prince, or something before having. But once I had the outline, everything was sort of locked in. I don't know if it was ever going to be a romantasy, actually. I think it's not a genre I'm very good at writing or have tried very much to write. And this is no shade to the genre, by the way. I think romantasy books are lovely, and I wish I could write them. I wish I was better at writing them, but I tend to lean towards the fantasy side. So I think it was never going to be a romantasy. I don't think that it was going to be as dark as it ended up being, but it was. So yeah, I think it was going to be an epic fantasy from the get-go.
There's an amazing line in there. It says, I think Taryn says to Wei, she says, I'm the only one who gets to take your life. And Wei thinks it might be the most romantic thing he's ever said. Like, I highlighted that. I love that line because it's sort of the summary of the book. It's not romance. It's super dark. That line captures, like, I'm the only one who gets to kill you is like, it's the most romantic thing in the book. I don't know. That felt to me like sort of the ironic hidden summary of the book. Maybe I'm wrong, but I loved it.
Yeah, I kind of like that too, aspect of it, that it didn't go into romance. One thing that's really cool about like writing genre fiction is that you get to know your audience's expectations and play around with them a little bit. I think if there wasn't such a strong expectation of romantic subplots in a lot of books, maybe some of the beats of the Poet Empress wouldn't have been as surprising to readers because they wouldn't be expecting it to go one way. So I had a bit of fun playing with or like trying to understand like where people might foresee the story going and trying to veer off an unexpected path.
One of the cool things, my friend Kayla Books, who's a huge book talker, she's the one who told me to read this, and she's like 98% romantasy. She's like, you got to read this, but it's not romantasy. So why do you think that romantasy readers are connecting with a very not romantasy story? Is it maybe just sort of the dark fantasy aspect that's in a lot of those books?
Yeah, I think there's truly a lot of crossover in readership. I'm always like so honored when people who primarily read mystery or primarily read romance or some other genre are venturing into a story like this one. And that's always like fills me with gratitude. And I think part of it was just unintentional. And part of it was deliberate too, where I tried to, with this book, keep the world building to be very accessible. And not to say I didn't do world building, I did tons of world building, but everything I did was trying to root them in things we would understand in real life intuitively and not make it there to be so much of a barrier so that people who are new to fantasy, like people who are coming from like general fiction, they might be able to find it more accessible. That being said, I think romantasy readers, I think there's a natural crossover between romantasy and fantasy because there's tons of world building in romantasy books and they're all used to, there's dark stories in romantasy, there's epic stories in romantasy. I think that there's really like the line between the two genres is super blurred in a lot of ways.
And instead of a spicy scene, we get a scene of a girl getting her tongue cut out in this book, which was pretty
spicy in its own way, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the most effective storytelling choices in the book is the way the timelines work. In the present, we meet Wei and Taryn is already cruel prince and horrible. But then the backstory starts with him as this sweet kid, and it moves forward from there. So while the present story, we know he's like, or he's evil. In the back, we just kind of keep learning about him. And then we keep asking, it opened the curiosity loop of how does this child become this? How did you, that to me was such an effective structure. And if you would have told it in a different, maybe linearly or something, it may not have landed. But how did you land on that structure? Because I think it really is a key component of why the storytelling is amazing on it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that because that was one of the major breakthroughs when I was writing. I hit a lot of blocks when I was writing the Poet Empress, and I had a lot of difficult moments. And one of them was figuring out how to tell the story and on a technical level. And I think the moment where I realized it doesn't have to be chronological, I think it was one of the big breakthroughs I had with the story. I faced two different problems. The first is that the present timeline is very dark and it's very relentless. Like if you excise the story, like the chapters about the past and just glue all the present chapters together, that would make for a very fast-paced and very relentlessly dark story where it's just one trauma for the main character after another. And so I think there was I was needing something to break it up momentum wise. And the other issue is, of course, we wanted to get the backstories in and understand the characters as they were in the present. So, it was one of those things where like it wasn't really a story decision; it was like a technical, like writing decision that. Once that came to me, I was able to proceed and solve both problems kind of at once.
Yeah, the pacing, once that happened, again, I think that was the key. That's when it just became like, I can't not keep reading this book and figure out how the hell this sweet kid became this, like the two complete polar opposites. And once we finally understand what happened to Taryn, the book doesn't let that become an excuse. There's a line near the end that I highlighted. It says, "It is true, he has suffered, but if everyone who suffered became a monster, the world would be overrun with monsters." So can you talk about that line between understanding someone's damage and still kind of holding them accountable?
Yeah, that was a very important part of the book to me. I think that I think there was no way. So this is not spoiler-free, by the way, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so there was no way that she was going to forgive him after what she did, because he has suffered, yes, but she has also suffered at his hands, and I think it's unfair to have that expectation of a character, particularly a female character, when she's being abused in this way and asked to forgive her abuser. So I think there was just no way that she was going to do that, and that was important to me.
Like, I mean, when I was reading, I was like, I thought there was a chance. Like, oh, I mean, because you're as a reader, you're empathizing and even sympathizing a little bit with this kid. Like, oh, that's how this, like, that's how this happened. That's horrendous. Like, man, anybody that's been through this stuff, and it's not like they had therapy back then, and or back, who knows? It's just this alternate world. But I almost thought at the end, like, maybe she's going to forgive him. Maybe there's a path. And I held on, not that I wanted that to happen, but I thought maybe that's where it was going to go. So, but it sounds like to you, it was a very clear decision that it was not going to go in that direction ever.
Yeah. So from the outline, it was going to be that way. But, talking about like storytelling and like technical decisions, I really did want there to be ambiguity, because that's where the tension comes from, right? You don't want the conclusion to be foregone. So I think there was a very fine needle I was trying to thread, where there was maybe going to be a hope of redemption, or maybe he was starting to be redeemed. So it could have gone either way, or I hoped it could have gone either way. That was the effect I was going for. And then I think the book makes its statement by the end.
So there was no version of the book where it was like, okay, we're gonna patch this up. Okay. I remember in our group chat, Lynn was so happy that it didn't go well for Taryn at the end. Although I love the ending. I feel like, again, Taryn's this monster. He's a sympathetic monster. Maybe the most sympathetic monster I've ever read, by the way. But you do give a really nice redeeming sort of, I think, I don't know what the exact line is, but it's something about like, we can't forgive him in this life, but the ancestors and, just sort of some spiritual realm, I suppose, can, and they can kind of, they can achieve forgiveness and happiness in sort of the afterworld. So that was maybe sort of the way to kind of give a little bit back to him, huh?
Yeah, I think he's had as happy of an ending as it could have gone for him, given that Wei was in the driving seat and she was the main character making the decisions. Right.
The crown dragon. So the dragon. By the way, you've seen this obviously. This special edition with like the extra dragon on, like, that's pretty wild. Anyway. So the crown dragon is teased for a lot of the book, and then the finale really pays it off. The whole sequence between Morrow and Taryn and Wei, the dragon, the fight, who's saving who, all that, the twists, unbelievable. How did you think about building the dragon into it? Like, was that something, again, was in there the whole, obviously you talk about the dragon from the beginning, but how did you sort of work that in, and what was that about?
Yeah, so part of the great joys of writing fantasy is you get to write about dragons, and I think dragons are one of the most beloved creatures in fantasy. Like, people have divided opinions of fairies or orcs or trolls or what have you, but I feel like everyone just loves dragons because they're so big and awesome and cool. And so I mean, if you want a reason, that was one reason I was trying to fit a dragon in, because they're cool. It was there during the first few chapters. I talk about writing the first few chapters, kind of finding Wei's voice, and she sees a dragon right when she gets to the palace and sees the dragon and she's about to enter court. That was where the initial burst ended. And so the dragon was there initially. I didn't know how big of a role it would play until later on, where wouldn't it be cool if there was a physical metaphor for the crown rather than just having a crown or a position of power? What if the crown was actually something big and magical and it could turn into blaze and could turn into fruit and could turn into whatever the physical metaphor for the power is? And so I think that was the motivation for including dragon in there. When they're fighting at the end there, they're really fighting the symbolic manifestation of power and what it means to be the emperor. And so, but they're also fighting a cool dragon, and I kind of love that.
I think you nailed it. And yeah, it's awesome that it was teased the whole book, because it's in the back of your head, and you keep talking about like, this match, this sort of duel or whatever it's going to be, we'll call it, is between Terran and the dragon. And it's like, it's teased the whole way, and you wait till the absolute end, but it pays off huge. So who's your favorite dragon from history?
Ooh, I feel like it's got to be one of the Game of Thrones dragons.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like the way that they portray dragons in that show is very cool, and how they're just these fearsome beasts that you can kind of tame as part of your empire, and I don't know. I think I also watched House of Dragon very recently, so there might be some recency bias there.
I've never actually seen Game of Thrones. I'm sure everybody's gonna hate me for that. I obviously need to watch it, and I didn't know there was dragons, so I gotta check it out. I think my favorite dragon is Pete's dragon, but just kidding. Anyway, does anybody know Pete's dragon? Am I like dating myself?
No, I haven't heard of Pete's dragon.
Pete's dragon is somebody's laughing at me in the chat. I think is it a Disney movie from it's even before my time, but I remember seeing reruns. It's a cartoon dragon. So anyway, yeah. So I love that the book is a standalone fantasy book. So much of fantasy asks you to commit to 3 books, 5 books, 12, a mortgage payment, who knows what. And like a lot of times I just don't want to commit to that. Like, it's just like, man, that's too much. So thank you for writing a standalone. It felt complete, which I appreciated. But I've heard you say originally you thought this might be a trilogy, and then by the end you kind of felt like continuing would force the story to take a moral stance and deciding whether it was sort of the right or wrong decision. Has your thinking changed at all on that recently?
I don't think so. Not for this series or this book. Yeah, I think early on, by the outline phase, I knew that I was not going to write any sequels to it. And so that was a decision made early on, which is interesting because, I am now itching to write a series. So I'm always, as a fantasy lover, as a lifelong fantasy lover, I'm always like hoping for my big fantasy series, but this book was never going to be that.
I once, when I was a kid, I wrote Ursula K. Le Guin a letter. She wrote first 4 Earthsea books, and I wrote her a letter and said, hey, the 4th book it was titled The Last Book of Earthsea. And I wrote her, I said, is this really going to be the last book of Earthsea? And she actually wrote me back 6 months later. This is back when wrote it, or typed it, I guess. And she said, yes, it's the last book of Earthsea, and I just trust my readers to make the next decisions. And 10 years later, she wrote 3 more books for Earthsea. So I'm holding out hope that this could happen, because I feel like there's so much. I want to spend 30 seconds trying to convince you. I think there's so much more story to tell for what happens next for Wei and Isan and the Azalea dynasty. And, some people are going to love Wei, but some people are not going to let her get away with what happened. And I feel like there's a lot of, in my book club chat, we were talking about it a little bit too. And a lot of people were like, wow, there could be more of a story. So we vote for more story. We're here. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very encouraging. I will say, I don't want to say never, because never say never, right? If I do end up doing a sequel, it'll be, and I have thought about potentially doing a book, but like it's crossed my mind. But if I were ever to do that, it would be years in the future, like you're saying with Ursula K. Le Guin, where I think there needs to be time for the first book and the ending of this book to ruminate and stand for itself before there's anything that follows after and answers unanswered questions.
So you're saying we got a chance here?
I think there's a chance. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. Okay, good. We made some progress there, and I think I agree. I think the ending does need to sit for a while, and then maybe 3 books from now we can come back and we can have you back at book club to talk about book 2. So anyway, let's open it up to questions to people. I've got more. I can keep going if nobody's got anything, but while Mama Hush apparently learned how to raise her hand, she's got the first question here. This is my mom, so I can't, please don't hold me responsible for anything she says here.
All right. Yeah.
That's just plain mean. I just want to say that I am a member of the silent generation, and I just appreciate a good book. And I don't have to analyze it. I just can appreciate it. I thought your visuals were excellent, your character development, and I especially liked the way you brought us back to where we saw how the 2 brothers became the way they came. And I'm a sucker for happy endings, and I like that ending. I like the ghosts, and I thought that was an excellent ending. And believe it or not, I read that book in 2 days. And I only had one question, because I thought, why did you name it the Poet Empress instead of the Empress Poet? But I love the book. As I said, as a member of the silent generation, a lot older than these people, it was excellent.
Well, thank you so much for giving it a read and liking it, and that means a lot to me. And yeah, the Empress Poet could be a great title too. Certainly, both are better than Little Romancers of the Azalea House. I'll give you that.
The way the Poet Empress looks on the triangle, it looks a little bit better on print, but it works. Lindsay Robinson, go ahead.
Is my audio working?
It is.
Okay, perfect. My question is about the tragedy aspect of the story. So the story is littered with tragedy. Do you feel like there is one in particular that was the greatest? Like either the characters or how they played out, or just which part do you feel like was the most heart-wrenching or disturbing, if you want to take it that way?
For me? Yeah.
Yes, for you in the story.
Yeah, I think I really felt for the brothers. I really felt their distance, and particularly because they were so close growing up, and how kind of system forced 2 people who were so close and clearly loved each other so much into being, turning out the way they were in the end. I think that I felt for that side of things a lot. Thanks for the question.
I have 2 brothers, and I think that storyline was, and that's maybe part of why my mom was connecting with it too, but definitely like you're super close as kids, and then you get older and things can happen. And actually, like, I've gotten closer with my brothers as we get older, and it's sort of nice to kind of reconnect and then sort of reshare those childhood memories. Crystal, fire away.
Awesome. Thank you. It's so exciting to be here. It's my first one of these. Shen Tao, I really enjoyed the book. I read it in like 24 hours. One thing I wanted to ask you about was the choice of first person. Like, as an author, that's a big choice, because there were times during this book where I loved the first person. I was like, okay, I know what she's thinking. Like, I'm deep into what she's doing. But there are other times where, like, even though this is a long book, I was like, oh, I could use even more world building. Like, I could use even more detail, but you're not going to get it from that first person viewpoint. So I was just curious if you could share, like, why did you choose that? What did you think that added to the story? What was your artistic process there?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for reading the book, and thank you for coming to book club. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm really, really excited to be here. I think this is my first time speaking to a book club. So I'm just really happy to talk to you, everyone here. I love answering craft questions too. I think the difference between first and third person is that in first person, you get to be really in a character's head, for good and bad. And I think on a craft level, I usually go for first person when I feel like the main character has a strong voice and has something to add with her voice and the way she speaks. And so with Wei, I mean, she's 16 at the beginning of the book, and she doesn't know anything about the palace. She, you really only, like you're pointing out, Crystal, it's everything is being filtered through her perspective, and so you get to see the palace through her eyes, and you get to see the magic through her eyes, and there are things she doesn't understand, and maybe things that she gets wrong because she's coming from such a naive and innocent point of view. And I think all that added to the book, in my opinion. I was really hoping to highlight the difference between her knowledge and her background and her situation versus everybody else's. I tried to get across her voice as a young person, and I think it's all the more tragic because she is so young and she thinks about the world in such an innocent way as well. And I think that kind of adds to the book. Whereas with third person, you can get a little bit more of a the author's perspective in, or you're not necessarily confined to her point of view. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. Okay, we'll do Elisa and then Giovanna. Elisa, go ahead.
I think, first of all, I just love the book. It was so evocative, so beautifully written, and it just really spoke to me. So thank you so much, and thank you for being here. But this wasn't going to be my question, but I just wanted to say that I think that you kind of got around the first person by using the dramatic convention of reading the diary entries. Because then you got other people's viewpoints, even though it was through her, it was other, and I thought that was really effective, and it really pulled on my heartstrings. But my question was going to be, why technically did you choose to have her basically save him and then kill him? Was that just for the drama of it, or was she honestly teetering on the brink? I mean, you said that there was no world in which she was not going to kill him. So why do that is my question.
Yeah, well, thank you. What I meant by that is that it was always going to end the way it did. Not that she wasn't necessarily hovering between her decisions. I think at each point she was making a decision, that method writing, given the information she has and what her goals and desires are at the time. I think at the point she chooses to save him, if she didn't save him, then Maro was going to be the emperor, and she had decided at that point that she didn't want that, even though that was a tough decision for her too. And so when circumstances changed and Maro died, then the answer for her in her mind to fulfill her current goals would be to kill him. So it was kind of a change in circumstances that led to her shifting the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Giovanna?
Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Hi. First of all, thanks for having me, Chris. Well, for having all of us. And I love this book. I read it, I think I'm going on maybe 4 months ago now. I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorite reads of the year. But I know that this is a dark fantasy, epic fantasy. And I know you've talked a lot about the genre, but there was moments where it also felt almost historical to me. And I was wondering if that was on purpose. Was there a line that you were towing? Just kind of more about that, because there were moments reading it where I was almost like, this could be a historical novel if it were real, obviously. But yeah, like I kind of got that vibe.
Thank you. I think we talked about Game of Thrones already in this interview. I think that's something that's an author I really admire, George R. R. Martin, and the way he does things where his world feel like they could be history. They could be real. Like they're clearly a second world fantasy, they're epic fantasy, but they draw on, inspiration from, like, for example, from War of the Roses, but it's still his own world, but it feels real. And I just thought that was so cool, and that was the coolest thing. And I think it's the way he does his characters. I think they act with a realism that you maybe see in historical figures. And I think that was the kind of vibe I was trying to go for with the Poet Empress, where it feels like it could have maybe happened, but there is magic. It's a fantasy world, but there's that layer of if there wasn't magic, this could have been something that happened.
Thank you for answering.
Thank you for the question.
Lois in the chat had a question. She said, congratulations on your book. It's fantastic. I was wondering if and how you used any Chinese or other mythologies as inspiration, if you felt any responsibility in representing something a certain way in doing so.
Oh, that's a great question. Because yes, I do. I do feel responsibility because I feel like because Chinese culture isn't super, there's tons of amazing Asian books and Asian fantasy books, but there aren't enough of them out there. And I think each one coming out is more blow-bearing than I would say, if it was based on inspired by European history. So I do feel a lot of responsibility for trying to represent the culture, because I think, people coming into this book, this might be their first Chinese-inspired book that they're reading. So that being said, I think there's a fine line between trying to represent the culture, which I don't think I was ever trying to do, and creating your own world and own culture because it's a fantasy book. And there were many moments and decisions where I thought, okay, I can either include this part of Chinese culture as is, or I could try to make it my own, because I don't want the book to lose magic for people who are familiar. Like, I want it to be fantastical for everyone. I don't want it to be like fantastical for people who aren't as familiar, and then, just the stories that they're familiar with growing up, if they are. So I think there's a very big fine line that to toe there, and it's one I'm still learning. And I think I don't know. It's a very tough question for me, because I think I was making certain decisions for this way or that way, and it was a very difficult thing to balance when writing this book. That's a great question, though.
As a white guy, I loved the Chinese influence in the book. It was very vivid to me, and everything, like from the names to the all the things that were woven into it, and it made me more curious about Chinese culture. And I actually we've been talking about maybe taking a trip to China, but anyway, and I just speaking as a white guy, that was extremely interesting to me, and it made me want to learn more about the culture. And like I said, even go visit. I have a song in a Disney World playing out there too, so I got an excuse to go. So I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to go. Anyway,
I think you would love it. Yeah, it's a very beautiful place, and it hasn't been. I feel like it's not a common destination for a lot of people. I don't know. It's not the first thing that some people think of. But there's so many places to see, and I just love it there.
Sure.
Yeah. I hope you get to go.
Giovanna, do you have another question, or are you just your hand's still up from before?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
I don't even know how to. Hold on, wait. Let me take it.
It's okay. Got time for a lightning round?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. What's your desert island book?
Ooh, Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson.
Okay. By the way, you will hate me after this. I've DNF'd Mistborn twice. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I can't crack the code on it. I get lost in the coin tricks and the metals and all that stuff, and I don't know. I got to give it another shot, right?
Yeah, I think, life is too short to read books that aren't to your taste. That's what I believe anyway. Yes. So there's no, some books that are well beloved haven't done it for me, and vice versa. And, read the books you want to read.
Just so you know, as a whatever I am, book fluencer, if I say I DNF Mistborn, the hate that I get for it, a lot of people don't have the approach of just like you do you. It's I will come to your house and kidnap you. Anyway, okay, if the Poet Empress were headlining a book tour, what books would be opening for it? You're the headliner. Does that make sense?
That's a little bit too music technical for me.
Who are the opening bands for the Poet Empress? Like I would put on maybe the Poppy War would be one of them. Who else? Who else is on the bill with you? Give me one or two others.
Oh yeah, books that are similar. I think She Who Became the Sun could fit a similar vibe. Yeah, that's a wonderfully written book too, and similar to the popular. And there's also Blood Over Bright Haven comes to mind. I feel like I get somewhere, or I quite like that book as well, and that's two.
That's good. Yeah, that works. That works. No, the chat's loving it. The chat.
Oh, I want to put in a plug for Fauna Lee's trilogy if you haven't read it yet. I really like I'm a big fan of the Greenbone Saga. I think that's fantastic book series. Yeah, I think it's also Asian. I'm just naming Asian inspired fiction. I don't know if I should.
It's great. We're reading next month. We're reading another Asian. We're reading Sublimation by Isabel Kim. So
okay.
yeah, okay, character from the Poet Empress you'd least want mad at you.
Taryn.
Stockings, right? Yeah. He's got knives in the ceilings. By the way, that's like maybe one of the coolest things I've read in a book ever, that like he's got knives everywhere in the ceilings and all over the place because he can just summon them. And yes, so cool. One book you wish you could read again for the first time.
Maybe, okay, this is kind of an off the beat answer, and I've kind of talked about the series before, but Guardians of Ga'Hoole, it's like a kid's book about owls, and I just had such a tremendous time reading it. I think a lot of the books I would love to read for the first time are books I really enjoyed as a kid, that like kind of the joy of reading something like that for the very, like, discovering fantasy for the first time, like that feeling is just unmatched. I would also say A Series of Unfortunate Events in that category, and some of the Warrior Cats books as well.
Yeah, for me, like A Wizard of Earthsea is the book that I would, and again, I read it as maybe 14 or 15-year-old or something like that. Like my first exposure to fantasy and dragons and the shadow self, and like that experience, and that, like, yeah, it's just electric. So I love that. Finish this sentence. I know I've had a good day writing when
I get something done. There are so many days when I don't get, like, something that's so strange about writing, like coming from a different profession before, is that the creativity and the writing and the outcome comes in bursts rather than a steady progress. And that was a very hard thing for me to get used to. I would get so frustrated at myself when I've put in 8 hours a day and I've got nothing written by the end and nothing solved. And that would happen so often. It was so frustrating. But I've since learned that is just how creativity works. And I'm sure you can relate as a songwriter, where sometimes magic happens, and some days I like to think of it as incubating the magic. You're still, you're sitting on the magic egg, and you're waiting for it to hatch. But you're sitting there for 8 hours, and it doesn't feel like anything is happening, but it'll get there. So
I relate to that so hard, and I hate that so much, because like, right, I'll put in 8 hours, and my wife will be like, how was the studio? I'm like, it was horrible. I got zero. I like explored 17 different ideas and went down a bunch of dead end paths, and I got nothing done. And, like I've heard, what you just said, and what sort of Brandon Sanderson would say, like, listen, it's, what you don't want to do now, and the next day you'll have fresh ideas, but that sucks. Those days suck. And I still can't get over those days. But you're right. You're sitting on the magic egg, you're warming it up, and tomorrow maybe you'll crack the code. But I still hate those days.
Yeah, exactly. But the happiest days, like you're saying, is when the egg actually hatches. You're like, fantastic. I had a great day writing.
When somebody asks me what I'm doing from now on, I'll just be like, I'm just sitting on the magic egg right now, trying to warm it up and see if something's going to happen. Yeah. I love it. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can kind of wrap it here. You guys are, if everybody's not following Shen on Instagram, she is StoryGoose. Now, I need to understand, why StoryGoose?
I just like geese a lot. It's actually a very simple answer. They're my favorite animal. I think they're so funny. I think they're so goofy. I think they've got a personality. I think they assert dominance when they need to. I just really like geese a lot. And when I was starting up as a writer, I got the advice to kind of just be. So I wasn't on social media at all, and that was a very new world to me. And people have said, just be yourself and share the things you love. So I thought, okay, I love geese. I'm going to make my handle a goose, and and they're right. It does bring, like, I think social media is very difficult for me, but, I wake up, not every day, as we just talked about, I'm happy with writing, but every day I wake up and I love geese. So, so I'm happy every day, being at StoryGoose on Instagram. Yeah.
That's my favorite answer you gave the entire time. That's so cool. I love that you love geese. I like every time I see geese, I get scared because they like, I've been attacked by birds a lot recently, but geese are especially scary if you're crossing some like nest path with them or something.
They're territorial, especially when they've got babies nearby. Like, they're very protective. Another reason to admire geese, right? They're just great parents. They really look after their family. But the thing is, geese are mostly all bluster and no bite. Like, if you I've done that with geese before, where they like approach with their wings out and whatever, and they seem super mean, but if you think about it, they're just a very oversized chicken, and they're not going to do anything to you. So if you just stand your ground and like don't back away, eventually they'll kind of realize that you're not scared of them, and they back off. So they're very they can make themselves seem bigger than they actually are.
Somebody wants a t-shirt with "Every day I wake up and love geese" on it. So I think if you sell that shirt, there's at least a few buyers in the book club here. By the way, what about when you're driving and geese are crossing the road and they just don't give a F at all. They just keep going at their slow pace and you got to sit there, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of my favorite, my Instagram feed is like pretty much all geese at this point. Because those are the types of posts I just always like. When I see a geese, I like it. I saw this video recently of this epic, the caption was "Epic Canada Goose Crossing." And it was this line of cars backed up at like both sides, lanes, just full. And then this massive line of like geese and their families crossing, just taking their time, like, never mind people are trying to get to work, right? They're just waddling. And just when you think it's done, the entire line of geese is done, there's more coming. I think the whole video was like 2 minutes of like more and more geese trickling in. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice to be in one of those cars right now?
So like everybody else is like, I hate being here, I want to run these, and you're like, why couldn't I have been in that car watching this parade of geese? I love it.
I would have loved to be there, but hey, I think they might have enjoyed that too. I think it was really heartwarming to see actually just everybody kind of stop and wait for that massive family of geese to walk across. I think there's something very subtly heartwarming about the small accommodations we make for animals. Yeah. Just as humans, like, I think it's really lovely.
I love that. You know what? If I would have known all this, I would have worked geese or a goose into the song somewhere. Maybe I'll make an edit or something like that, and we'll drop something, and it'll be all good. So I got one last question for you. What's the one thing you hope sticks with readers after they close The Poet Empress?
Ooh, I hope that they feel something from the book, and it doesn't have to be the thing I intended them to feel. Everybody walks away with an interpretation from a book, and I think that's okay. And I just wanted them to have some kind of takeaway and some kind of memory of the book. I know it's kind of a vague and cop-out answer, but that's generally how I feel, where I feel like I've done my job as an author if you walk away with the book remembering it, and it made an impression, whatever impression that was, it made a mark, and you felt something while reading it. I think that is just all I can hope for as an author.
I think we all felt a lot of feelings when we finished this one, so I think it was mission accomplished for us. So thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you, Shen, so much for being here. If you guys have not read The Poet Empress, there's a few people that just come and hang out, and that's cool. Or if you couldn't finish it in time or whatever, you got to read it. It's one of my favorites of the year for sure, and it's not even really in the genre that I generally read all that often. So please read it. Shen, you're free to go. You can hang if you want. We're going to talk about, just book club stuff here for a bit, but you're free to go. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us. And can't wait for the YA books.
Hey, well, thank you everyone for attending. Like I said, it was a pleasure coming here, and you've got such great questions. And thank you again, Chris, for having me and for that amazing song. It was such a banger.
Cool. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you.
All right.
And I hope you have a lovely rest of your book club.
Thanks, Shen.